So as we get started today, we also have some discussion, a question there at your table, and that is, what do you hope to get out of mental health community today? Right? What is it that you came here hoping to get out of our time? So why don't you turn into your tables and talk a little bit, and then we'll pull you back right after that. Go for it.
Place in the heart, so don't curse out the light while you learn from the dark. Oh, life belongs when death sets us free. Feels like a blessing falling on me. I find your word is ever shining bright. When I'm tempted to despair, I lift my eyes and find you there. From your lips flow words eternal, and at your voice the shadow trembles. I will wait for you. I will wait for you. I for you day by day through faith and doubt. I will remember how you saw me out, a helpless child, alone, confused, not by your spirit, built up and true. From your lips flow words eternal, and at your voice the shadow trembles. I will wait for you. I will wait for you. I for you.
All right, let me pull you back in here. I love that we get to talk to one another. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do a testimony. And so we've got our own Colton Harker, who's going to come up and give us testimony. Give him a big hand.
Can I borrow that? Yep. Let's shake. Hey, friends. How are we doing today? I love this community. I love how big it is. I just appreciate. I don't know. I was telling Kay here. I was like, I've never felt more anxious to share something than a talk about anxiety. So it feels good to be in a space where I'm just like not alone, and I can walk in and be like, okay, great. I'm with like people. I'm with my people. Well, my name is Colton. Like Todd said, I'm 33. I have a beautiful wife. I have beautiful kids. I would say they're perfect. We're on our way to perfect. And at Saddleback, I get to serve as the college pastor here at our Lake Forest campus. Earlier this week, Pastor Liz came into my office and was like, hey, we'd love for you to talk about anxiety. And in my head, I knew it was an immediate yes. But everything in my body was like, it's a no. But I knew I had to say yes, and they had some amazing encouragements. Kira was there alongside, helping me encourage that yes. But when I went down to write it, I really struggled because it's, how do I, like with a lot of our mental health journeys, it's really hard just to pinpoint like where to start and where to end. How do you share a story like that? Because I'm not sure about you guys. I can't pinpoint the exact moment, but I just remember like I became increasingly aware of just my body's reaction to things. And it was when I was in high school. I just had become aware that when I was doing homework, when I was hanging out with friends, I did some on-stage stuff like acting and random things like that. Don't judge me for being a theater kid for a little bit. But when I was on stage, it was kind of like almost at any moment, there's like a word that was said or an experience where you're just driving and you remember this moment or this conversation that you had where you just feel like you dropped the ball. And I just remember the closest word I had for it was my body would short circuit. I would feel my heart racing like it is right now. And I would just like these heart palpitations and my hands would start shaking. And my hands would just start sweating. I remember just going like this a lot, and my chest just started to get so heavy, like people were sitting on it, like they were climbing on top of it. It was a dog pile. And it was just so hard to breathe, and I would just have these racing thoughts. And I had always pictured it like a snowball going down a mountain. You know, that just like classic example is as it goes down the mountain, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I always felt like I was on the opposite side of it, like we were going down a hill and this ball was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I was trying to stop it, but I was going down with the snowball too. I was sliding down the mountain just as it was getting bigger. And as my thoughts kept getting bigger and bigger, and so did the snowball. And I just couldn't stop it. And eventually that snowball just turned into an avalanche and I got swept up right alongside with it. And I always knew when I got caught up in that avalanche is when I started just to lash out. I would do things and I would say things just to help me feel in control and help me feel normal. And I'm not sure if some of you guys resonate with some of this, but sometimes it's like an out-of-body experience where I knew as I was saying these things, I was like, I know these things aren't true, and I know these things aren't what's going to help me find healing or feel good, but it's just the only thing I can do right now. And it was hard because the snowballs kept coming. And I know that each one of those things wasn't just a snowball. It was a thought. And the thoughts are just, you're not strong enough. And you're not good enough. This is why people don't like you. And this would just engulf me. And no matter how many things I did, no matter how many things I said, no matter how much effort I pushed against this snowball, this avalanche, I just couldn't escape it. And after a lot of, we'll call it encouragement from friends to go to therapy, I finally gave in. And it was a healing choice, but it was a hard one. When I had gone to therapy, I'd start to realize that there was a word for the things that I was feeling. There's a word for the snowballs. There's a word for the heaviness on my chest, everything that was going on, the short circuits. I had an anxiety disorder. And I realized that this isn't what everyone felt. I had this idea like, oh, this is everyone's bodies. Everyone thinks about these things. This is how everyone's bodies works. And I realized that it wasn't. And I know that people might experience nervousness and everyone experience, situational anxiety. But I wasn't sure if everyone felt it or experienced it in the same way I did. And with a lot of mental health things, it just felt unfair for me. And I felt a little bit angry. And I felt it was unfair, and I was jealous that I didn't get to trust my body and I didn't get to trust my brain like other people did. That I felt like my brain was telling me lies and my body was reacting to things that it didn't need to. It felt unfair that I had to do so much work in therapy, and I felt like I just kept getting hit by avalanche after avalanche, and other people didn't. But through help of spending time with the Lord and the amazing, amazing, amazing therapist that he provided me with, and the medications that he helped create and inspire through other people, I started to finally feel like I had the tools to not let anxiety rule me anymore. And that I realized that the story of the snowball had more than one ending. I didn't need to get swept up every time. There was another option. God had taught me that I just didn't need to stop the snowball. That was never my intended purpose. My intended purpose was never to be on the other side of that. But he taught me that I could just step aside and let the snowball carry right on through. That I could watch the avalanche go right on through, because in those moments, I was thinking that I was all alone in those things. And I remembered that it's God's truths that are going to carry me through this. All I needed to do was step aside and remember his truths. And when my body tells me that I'm unlikable and untalented and unable, I can remember that I'm a son of God who is loved and who is gifted and has a purpose in his story and a purpose in his body. And that's where stories like this, I feel like, typically end. And that's where you say, like, thank you, I found it, I did the work, I went to therapy, I found Jesus, bye. But I just don't feel like that's where my honest story ends. And I'm not sure if there's like a pretty bow on it. Because just even a few months ago, we had a retreat for our college students. And it was absolutely amazing. There was life change happening all over the place. Chains of addiction with students being broken, healing being found, people making reconnections with the Lord. And in the midst of all of these beautiful, sweet moments, I was being crushed. And I was being swept up in these same avalanches that I was being swept up in when I was in high school. And it was so defeating. I was like, I thought I was on the other side of this. And it wasn't the first time since high school, and I don't think it'll be the last time. But I was angry that I was more sad that when I think about that retreat, when I think about New Year retreat, my first thought immediately wasn't those sweet moments in session with students. It made me sad that those first moments that I thought of were making up excuses to go hide in the freezer so that people didn't see that I was so weak, or I was making up excuses to hide in my room so I could catch my breath, so I could put my back against the wall, so that no one could see what I was going through, despite the fact that I was surrounded by so many close people. Yet, at the same time, I will always remember the tenderness that the Lord met me with in the freezer as he pulled me out of those avalanches. And he reminded me as I went into that freezer, I helped use those tools that my therapist told me. And I also went to him in just this desperate prayer. I feel like if you're stepping into this room, you're familiar with desperate prayers. Those things where it's like, God, I don't know what to do. I can't do this whole thing. I need something different. I need you to show me that I need to step it away. And God was just yanking me out of that avalanche. Even more freedom was found after the retreat when I was struggling, and I shared with a friend with what was happening, and he said, me too. I thought I was the only one. And it was that connection and that realization, that gift from the Lord, that helped me be able to share the story that I'm sharing today. Because no one gets rewards for being the tough one. There's no first place. There's no trophy. Because God never said, come to me when you're strong and come to me when you have it all put together. Come to me when everybody likes you. He gave us permission to come to him in the anxiety, to be in the middle of it. And he says, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And what I'm realizing is that my mental health journey isn't this horizontal line where it's one step forward and 3 steps back. It's this squiggle. It's this, I started it and I found some tools, and then there's kind of a rebound, and it's just kind of all over this place, and it's a little bit of a mess. But in the mess, the Lord is working through these things, and the Lord is teaching me things, and I'm embracing the squiggle. I'm embracing the fact that this is a spiritual journey that can't be separated from my physical one. It's prayer and it's the work here on earth that's going to help me find comfort and healing in this anxiety. I have anxiety, and I will be praying for healing. I may or may not see it on this side of heaven. But until I do, I choose to make friends with it today. I will let it tell me what I care about. I will watch the snowballs fall, but I won't let it suck me in. I'll try not to. But I'll let it show me what I'm caring about. What are the things that is trying to occupy my mind, and I'll get to decide what I want to do with that thought. Wow, someone shared that thing with me, and it really made me feel insecure, and I let that insecurity snowball fly right by me, and I get to decide, what was it about that comment that did that thing? Lord, why am I feeling so not enough in these things, even though you've called me to this? I never thought that I'd get to this point in my journey with anxiety. And if you've ever felt trapped like I still sometimes do, I really encourage you just to not sit in the struggle alone. Sitting in this room is one of those steps. Maybe you're already not struggling with that part, but maybe you are. But there isn't shame on the other side of sharing. There's hope. And there isn't rejection on the other side of reaching out to the Lord in prayer, and that desperate prayer. There's freedom and there's healing. And maybe you'll find this verse as helpful as I do. It's Ephesians 3:20. It says, "Now all glory to God who is able through his mighty power work within us to accomplish infinitely more than we might ask or think." He is able to bring peace, and he desires to work in us, in our brokenness, in our anxiety, in our mess. And despite all of the struggles that we have, and through our struggles, he will do infinitely more than we might ask or think. Thanks for letting me share my story today.
Thank you, Colton. I love him so much. Yes, thank you. I was so excited to see that he was here today. I'm Kay Warren. I'm in disguise today with my cool glasses. How many of you have seen the movie The Incredibles? Anybody seen that animated? Edna Mode, right here. This is me. Somebody told me yes, but you're a little taller. So, but anyway, I had cataract surgery in January. And I decided to do these really high-tech lenses because you don't really care, but I decided to do these high-tech lenses. And the thing about these high-tech lenses is they can be adjusted once they're in your eye, which is not the way most cataract surgery lenses are. And I didn't read the fine print, famous for not reading the fine print, but had I read the fine print, I would have seen that this process takes then weeks to get your eye at the place where then they lock it in with a UV light. And it's like a space game. I'm looking at this little thing, and this thing, it's like I'm playing a video game. It's like I'm Tron. I don't know. I mean, something is happening in my eye. The other day I came home, and my eye was very dilated, and Amy said, "Oh, that's really scary." I don't know. I don't know. If it ever turns red, we're running. Anyway, all that to say, I have to protect against UV light. Oh, thank you. Lowering those will help too. But these lights don't bother me, but UV lights do. And so I have a few more days, maybe weeks, before my eye gets locked in to its vision, and I will look like myself again. All of that to say, I'm glad that you're here. It's awesome to have you. I love that we have the wing section over here. Let's everybody hello to our other folks over here. So glad that you're here. I get to introduce you to our speaker today, Dr. Curtis Hsia. He is a Southern California native, California boy, woo, attended UCLA for his undergrad studies. And then, listen, you guys, he has had the most amazing experiences. He went to Hofstra University for his doctorate. And while he was there, and that doctorate was in combined clinical and school psychology, he interned with 2 doctors. I'm so sorry that I cannot pronounce their names. I practiced and I still don't know how to say it. But they were researching and treating OCD. And he also interned at Boston University's Center for Anxiety and Related Disorders as a postdoctoral fellow, where he primarily focused on the intensive treatment protocols for panic disorder with agoraphobia and specific phobias. Then he came back to California, the promised land, and was a professor at Azusa Pacific for 9 years, and his research there focused on PTSD and anxiety disorders. Yeah, knows a little bit about the topic for today. And then in 2012, he opened the Anxiety Research Center, which is now known as the Orange County Anxiety Center. He's authored a dozen scientific papers, presented hundreds of posters, papers, and clinical talks and workshops internationally over the years, continuing to engage in research and teaching, and currently writing a book tentatively titled The Anxious Christian. Sounds like a great book that we'll be all looking for. He was telling me that he enjoys hiking with his wife and his 2 young children, and I'd love for you to give a very warm welcome to Dr. Curtis Shea. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. It's my honor to be here. I look forward to sharing a little bit about what I do, but more importantly, some information for all of you and being able to have a better understanding of anxiety. Because a lot of people call me and say, I have anxiety. And my first question is, what do you mean by that? Because it's such a broad way of stating it that is not helpful to either the individual who has it or for us to be able to help out. So we're going to talk a little bit about this today and hopefully give you some takeaways that you can do either in terms of just trying to help people who are uncomfortable with anxiety, and I'm just kind of like a low level, but it doesn't bother me too much, which we consider kind of a like a subclinical level, or just, hey, I need some help on a day-to-day, which is normal, to, hey, when do I actually seek help and what sort of help should I get? If it's something that, no, this is like interfering on a regular basis, is causing a lot of distress. So we're going to do some of those differentiations and hopefully be able to give you a better sense of what anxiety is, some other related disorders around that, how you can either help yourself or help people around you with these sort of things. Emma, slide please. So that's kind of the overview. We're going to be looking at acute versus chronic in terms of anxiety, differential diagnosis, what kind of effects it can have on the your body, and yourself, as well as biblical effects in terms of like, how do I think about this in terms of the context, and what does the church tell us about it, as opposed to, which isn't surprisingly always in line with the Bible says, right? So understanding church culture, as well as what the Bible says, and when it overlaps well, and sometimes when it doesn't, and how to kind of think about these issues, okay? And that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today. If I'm talking too fast, please let me know. My students will always say I talk too fast and cover too much information. If I'm talking too fast, ask me to slow down, but I am going to be mindful of the time and try to get through as much as I can to give as much information to you as I can as well. Slide, please. So when people say I have anxiety, okay, it's a general term, the same way people now say I have OCD, right? Or that's an OCD behavior. But we want to be very clear on our definitions. So when we're talking about acute anxiety, this is what things that come and go with stressors that we all experience and we all have, okay? Coulter was just saying he's a little anxious coming up here, right? That's normal. Why? Because there's, I don't know, I would guess about maybe 100, 150 people in the room. A lot of people get anxious, and those sort of situations makes them uncomfortable. So anxiety that kind of is acute comes and goes with different situations, right? Job interview, first date, taking the APs, those sort of things are like, but they'll come and go, right? It's like as soon as the event of like, oh, I feel a lot better, life goes back to normal, it's no longer a stressor for me, I'm not thinking about it anymore, it's no longer a problem for me. Much better, right? I feel much more relaxed about that. And it can be either academic, it can be social, it can be areas of performance, right? So whenever we have this, but when I'm done, then we're okay. Then we're not worried about it, and we can kind of let those go. And those are sort of things that we all experience, and to some extent it's actually useful. We'll get to that in a little bit. Chronic anxiety is when we want to step in. Chronic anxiety is I'm always feeling anxious. There's always something going on, okay? So situations will make it worse. So I'm a worrier about finances, but now taxes are coming up, right? So every day I'm worried about, I'm checking my bank accounts, I'm always concerned, what if I run out? What if my pension doesn't hold up? What if my insurance, what if, even though all of my data says, hey, I'm actually okay, but I'm always worried, and then every now and then it gets really extreme, oh my gosh, this taxes, what if I don't have enough to cover my taxes, right? Then we see that, that's when we start to have problems. So when it's a chronic issue. We have different anxiety, so when people say, I've been diagnosed with anxiety, my first question is, which one? Because anxiety in itself is not a disorder, it's a classification of disorders. Okay, it's like saying, I have cancer. Well, which type of cancer? Well, we have all sorts of different outcomes. You have all sorts of different approaches to treatment depending on the type of cancer. Same thing with anxiety disorder. So some of the common ones are generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD. I tend to be a worrier by nature. I find things to worry about even when things are going well. I have a lot of yes buts, a lot of what ifs. Because of that, I feel this low level all the time, something's wrong, right? I don't have that really kind of panicky state all the time. I might get it on occasion, but I'm irritable. I have muscle tension. I have difficulty sleeping. I have concentration issues. Why? Because I'm always worried about something happening. What if? Okay? Panic disorders, I'm afraid of panic attacks that increase heart rate, shakiness, feelings of unsteadiness. Because of that, I think I'm going to pass out, have a heart attack, or die. And I avoid situations where that happens. That's the agoraphobia part. Okay? So, but that's a really intense panic attacks. We have specific phobias, test anxiety, fear of flying, fear of animals, so specific irrational, non-logical fears that we have, okay? The one that we see actually the most often is fear of vomit. That's the one that we see, I think honestly, because you can't escape it, right? I don't have to get on the plane, but I'm always carrying my body with me, right? I'm always worried about, what's gonna happen? We have social anxiety disorder. I'm afraid either of embarrassing myself in front of others or that others think poorly of me. Okay, so those are some typical diagnoses that we have for an anxiety disorder. Okay, so and as opposed to I'm just kind of worried about like next week's test. Okay, or I'm worried about the big presentation I have to do at work next week. Right, that passes after that time. Oh, I feel a lot better. Okay. We have a lot of related illnesses that go along with anxiety disorders. Depression is a very common one. Low mood for 2 weeks or more on a daily basis. Difficulties concentrating. We have a whole host of things that go along with that. So again, when we say depression, we talk about a specific type of disorder. Illness anxiety is I think I have cancer, or I really believe I have a specific disorder or a medical disease. Somatic disorders like my back hurts, my stomach hurts, my head hurts all the time is a way of expressing kind of my anxiety or my discomfort. Body dysmorphia, there's something wrong with my body. Like there's something wrong with my nose. I keep on trying to cover it up all the time because all you guys see is how disgusting my nose is, right? I don't like pictures of it. I try to look at it at certain angles because I don't want you looking at my nose. And obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD. I have obsessional thinking patterns that happens dozens, hundreds of times a day. I have to engage in a compulsion to get rid of that thought, to get rid of that anxiety around that thought for just a little while. So that's OCD, right? So when we say I'm a little bit OCD, that's usually a misnomer, right? So when we talk about diagnosis, is when we have anxiety, we're looking at what does that actually mean. So a lot of people have it as, we all have it at certain times acute, right? But the question is, when does it become interfering? Is when it becomes chronic. Slide, please. So we have some complicating factors, right? We just talked about other diagnosis. Learned behaviors. How do I get out of the situation is the most common one. How do I get out of this? How do I make sure this doesn't happen again? And it can be successful, right? Then I don't have to do this. I don't have to get on that plane. I don't have to talk to that person. How do I get out of these situations? And then it can be successful in a lot of different ways when we do that. We also have cultural and environmental factors. Ethnically, for example, Asians typically, it's a shame honor thing, so you don't want to admit that you have any sort of mental disorder because that means that your whole family has it, and then it causes all sorts of different rifts and problems potentially of even like who's going to get married or can you get a job, right? So you don't talk about these things, right? This is not what we have, okay? 2, what does your family tell you about mental health? Just suck it up, right? Work harder, get through that. That's not a real problem for you. Right, so what have you been told throughout your life that affects how you think about mental health or anxiety disorders specifically? Okay. Generally, we think about it in terms of interference and distress. When does it become interfering on my life on a regular basis? How does this now change the quality of my life? Can I not do my job anymore? Do I not hang out with my friends anymore? What sort of effects does this have that actually changes my life and it interfered at a level that can be problematic? Am I going to lose my job over this? Okay, that's when we want to step in and actually do something that's more proactive, as opposed to, there's not a lot of interference. I had a woman who, for example, when I was in Boston, it turned out that technically she was afraid of snakes. But we lived in Boston, not Texas. She was in her 60s. The only time that she would see snakes was when she would take her her grandkids to the zoo, and they're old enough where they could go to the reptile house by themselves, and she could always turn the channel, so no interference. So we don't code anything. Why? There's no interference. Okay, as opposed to, I know some people who live like in like RSM and like the areas where hitting into the foothills are like, ooh, there's like snakes in my backyard, and I'm not going in my backyard, and I have to have my husband go with me every time I go into the garage. Right now, we're having a little bit of distress. Interference, right? Why? Because it's starting to cause problems. I can't utilize my house. Okay? Distress is how much anxiety do I have about this? So that woman who had concerns about snakes, I don't care about this. It doesn't bother me. My friends have the same thing. I'm not distressed about it. Or if other people like, I'm so embarrassed by it, the fact that I have this, oh my gosh, can't tell anyone about this. This is so distressing to me. Then again, we want to step in. So we're looking at interference and distress when we talk about anxiety. How do we actually think about anything from the complicating factors that kind of change things? We look at those diagnoses, as well as how interfering and distressing is it for that individual, or potentially for the family if we're talking about kids, right? If we can't go on vacations because my son's afraid of flying, well, then we got a problem, right? So how do we address these things? Okay, slide please. We talked a little bit about this. Anxiety in general is, stress isn't a bad thing. So we talk about stress as being a negative thing. We actually want some level of stress. Not distress, we want stress. Why? Because it actually increases performance, right? If I don't care about something, I'm just not gonna do it, right? If you tell me there's a test coming up and you don't have to put your name on it, it doesn't affect your grade, I'm not gonna study, right? We want a moderate level of stress. Why? Because it actually gets us to focus and to concentrate and do things. So peak performance is actually moderate level of stress. If we have too much stress, so I would tell as an example for my students, hey, if we have a test and it's 90% of your grade, and it's oral and it's one question, okay, let's go, right? That's gonna interfere with their actual ability to perform. Why? Because it's so much stress that they can't actually concentrate. So we don't want that either. Yeah, but moderate levels are actually okay. So if it's generally, we have a moderate level of stress, it's short term, and other people have it, we're probably okay. But again, if it's getting to the point where we can classify it, we can actually, the DSM, is a Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's like, these are the list of all the information we have in the symptomology that defines different disorders. Does it meet those classifications, those disorders, then we have an issue. Why? Because we know that it meets that classification, it's interfering, it's distressing. The good thing is we actually know how to treat a lot of those. So we know how to treat a lot of these disorders, especially anxiety and OCD disorders. There's some really good treatments out there that are relatively brief. So we're not talking lifetime of treatment. We're talking about relatively short-term treatments. So, and that's the goal, is how do we actually change a lot of these things? Slide, please. Okay, so when we talk about effects, we look at anything from generally, again, from a general thing on the short-term things. We might have lower performance, potentially, if it's too interfering. It can affect our mood, become irritable, although honestly, the way I look at that is if I'm irritable, that's everyone else's problem and not mine. And then we have an increase in cortisol, we have learning to tolerate distress. Now that's an important point, is what do I learn through these experiences? Do I learn that I can handle them and I can move through them? Or, oh my gosh, I can't do this, I have to stop, or I can only do it if someone helps me. So part of it, and we'll get more into this, is the cognitive side. How do I actually think about these things, okay? And self-medication very often happens too, right? And again, if it's short term, it may not be a horrible thing, but again, ideally, we're not doing this. When we're at a clinical level, now we're having big problems. I'm not going to school. I'm just skipping I'm not taking that test, right? We can have other issues that go along with that. When we have a clinical issue, counseling skill sets don't work. Okay, when we have a clinical issue, counseling skill sets typically are less efficacious, according to the research. Why? because it's not a short-term thing anymore. It's not, hey, I'm trying to help you through this little bit of a hump. It's every day, all day. So when we tell someone, hey, just relax, okay, the way I'll describe it is, yeah, some of you already get that. So what happens is, if I think this is equivalent of a catastrophic outcome, so what I'll describe it as like if a bear comes through the door, right? My prefrontal cortex probably doesn't need to engage. My body automatically knows that's a threat. Claws, teeth, this is a problem, right? My body starts to activate and get ready to defend myself. So I'm going into fight or flight, which is the same thing as a panic attack. When that happens, it's like, hey, just relax, it'll be okay. Like, you'll be fine. Take some deep breaths. Here, have some essential oils. This is okay. It's like, no, that thing's gonna kill me, right? My body's all keyed up. Why? Because I'm telling myself I'm in trouble. My body's responding as if that's true. So to tell someone, hey, it's okay, just read the Bible, pray a little bit more, it'll be okay, it's not the same thing anymore. It's not just a job interview. Yeah, it is a job interview. Yeah, you do get prep for it. Yes, but God also knows where you're gonna go and whether that job's gonna be good for you or not. So we're planning that out, we're okay. I can trust in God in that. As opposed to, I have a clinical disorder that says everything freaks me out all the time. And that's gonna be something where that's not gonna be as efficacious. Slide, please. Okay, so what to do? It depends. So if we have an acute issue, comes and goes, might be okay. We need to tolerate some level of distress. Life is stressful, right? Our goal isn't to remove all the stress out of life. Okay, our goal is actually to normalize stress and move into it and get used to it if it's at a level that's tolerable. A lot of people try to say, hey, how do I make this easier? How do we back out of this? And our point is, no, we actually want to move into things and normalize it if we know it's okay. All right, and that's the goal of treatment when we look at these things eventually. So what do? It depends. Sometimes in schools we can do what's called independent education plans. And the idea is, hey, how do we modify things to make it a little bit easier? Where can we go on disability? That can be useful too. Talking to friends and pastors, lay counselors can be an excellent choice depending on what the issue is. Hey, I'm having problems in my marriage. Hey, if it's something that's relatively short term, that might be great, right? I'm just like, we're fighting all the time. Like, how did you guys handle that? Like, we talk about that in our small group. Like, how do you do like this child raising thing, right? Like, my kid just did this. Like, ooh, I don't know, but I can tell you what didn't work for me, right? And we'll have these discussions about like how we do child raising, and that can be useful. There's times where if the kid there's enough behavioral problems, I might know to go see a marriage and family therapist, which is perfect. Why we do marriage and family, right? So they're skilled in these counseling techniques that will be really helpful in my marriage or with my kids, right? So that could be very useful. And there's other times where we want to go to a clinician or a clinical person, deal with clinical issues, right? So the way I'll put it is I'm really horrible at counseling. Like all my stuff is in clinical. All my training has always been clinical. I'll make your marriage worse. I don't know what I'm doing as a counselor because I'm not a counselor, okay? So I only do clinical stuff. And within clinical stuff, I only do anxiety and like OCD stuff. So I can do this stuff. So that's what you're looking for depending on what the issue is. You don't want to come to me with your like if your kid's out of control, because I don't know, right? Why? Because I don't have the background. So we're trying to figure out who do you go to that's going to be most efficacious. And sometimes it's just a friend because I need to vent. Right? Sometimes I need someone I go to my older brother sometimes with like, hey, like, what did you do when your kids did this? And he goes, well, this is what I did, right? And that's kind of useful. It's like it's relatively normal stuff, right? I think it's getting a little bit bigger. We need some more additional help, right? So that's what we kind of look for. Slide, please. Okay, let me stop for just a minute. Any questions up to this point? What's the question? Was there someone said yes? No. Oh, at the end? Okay. Okay, sorry. Okay, so what do we know from the Bible? We know lots of stuff from the Bible. What do we know of the Bible in terms of anxiety? There's a couple different examples that often get brought up, right? And there's actually different verbiage that's used to define it in terms of what anxiety is. So on the left-hand side, we have, I'm going to mangle this, Merriman now, and it's appropriate care or concern, right? I probably shouldn't use positive and negative in the terminology, but the idea is we have certain situations where we have Paul who's saying like, hey, I'm anxious about the church. I'm trying to take care of you guys, right? I'm trying to take care of you guys, so I'm sending someone to you, right? I'm concerned about how you guys are doing, which is a normal kind of concern, right? I'm worried about my kids. Hey, how are my kids doing in school? It's like that, right? I'm trying to make sure we're doing okay. The other examples underneath that aren't necessarily negative, but it's like, hey, in these situations, like, let's not be over worried. Let's not, but this is based on the concept that I know that God is in control. I know God has this. So it's used in that kind of terminology, like, hey, there's already an issue, but hey, we're okay, right? If God is omnipotent and omniscient and he's outside of time and he knows your life from beginning to end and he knows all parts of it, this is okay. You may not like it. He's not saying it's fun, but it's going to be okay, right? So we don't need to worry about this. God's got this planned out, okay? We have other ones where when we have Marizo, what I found kind of interesting when I was looking at these, when we have Martha cleaning the house, right, and she's getting mad because her sister's not helping and goes to Jesus like, she's not helping me, right? It's what's going on though. It's interfering with actually her life. She's getting angry. She's looking at the wrong part or with the important part of what's going on. So it's actually interfering and causing distress in her own life, okay? When we have Matthew 13, when Christ is talking about the different seeds, right? Now we have another problem. The worries of the world are choking out my faith. So again, now we're having a bigger problem. Now these are ones where it's actually causing significant issues. We're like, uh-oh, my worries are now interfering. Okay, so again, we're going back to that kind of counseling, clinical or acute versus chronic. Just keep that in mind. There's different ways to kind of think about these verses rather than lumping them all together. Okay, because there's some subtle differences there. Slide, please. Okay, what does this mean for me? Number one, God doesn't remove the worries necessarily. In these situations, he hasn't. He may or may not. He may have a miracle and remove the situation, but also, interesting, most people say, I wish God would get rid of my anxiety. They don't say, I wish God would help me with this situation. Right, which again, it's a little bit different in that thinking, so you want to keep that in mind. But God doesn't doesn't remove the worries in these situations. What he's asking us to do is normalize in some sense. Hey, like we have to recognize that yes, there are worries in the world, and some of them are realistic and some of them are not. But do we recognize that God is going to be faithful through all of this and throughout all my life, regardless if I have anxiety, regardless of the real situations, regardless of whatever's going on, can I trust that God's going to be in this with me and it's okay? So I have to normalize having anxiety. I have to normalize feeling off. I have to normalize situations rather than how do I get out of this, okay? And we can move despite our anxiety. We don't have to stop because of it. So when we do a lot of our treatment, our goal is, hey, we have to get used to feeling scared. Our goal is, can I get used to feeling scared? Can I recognize that scary is different than dangerous? Scary's fine. A roller coaster, you're safe. A lot of people don't like roller coasters, but it's not like you're going to die on it. Let me rephrase that. The likelihood of you dying on a roller coaster is incredibly low. And actually, that's a really important part, because we talk about this a lot in treatment, is there's no guarantees. When you guys drive home today, you're actually safer on a roller coaster. And people say, but I have control over my car. Yes, you do, and you have no control of the cars around you, okay? I had a guy say, I would rather, I don't fly because I need to have control. I would rather be flying the plane and crash it than let a pilot fly, which is why I don't fly. Why? Because I need that control, okay? So I'll drive everyone. I said, but you don't have any control of the cars around you. And then again, that's when we do a lot of the cognitive thinking patterns, but I have to recognize, is this worth the risk? How much risk is there in getting an elevator? How much risk is there getting onto a roller coaster? If it's worth it rather than I'm scared. So we're looking at logical versus emotional. We got to normalize emotional discomfort and physical discomfort rather than because I'm emotional or physically uncomfortable, I should not do this. The better question is it worth it? And how much risk is it? So when we talk about anxiety, we're moving away from the idea of I'm scared. Scared is okay. We got to get used to being scared. We have to get used to our bodies also feeling scared. That's okay too. Am I in danger? That's the question. Is that really a bear or is that a dog? right? If my body's reacting to a dog as if it's a bear, I'm relatively safe. Okay, we have 4 to 5 fatal dog attacks in the United States per year. We have about 89 million dogs in the United States, right? What's the likelihood of me dying from a dog attack? It's relatively low. What does the data tell me, not how do I feel? Therefore, and then is it worth it? Well, it depends, right? Depends on the situation, but we'll get into that. Okay, but we want to move despite our anxiety, not because of it. And the other thing to think about when we talk about worries in general is there something I should do to address this issue, or can I recognize I'm just worrying? Is there something I should actually do? So if I'm worried about paying my taxes, okay, well, should I do my taxes and pay them? Probably. Will that reduce my anxiety? Yes. I should probably do that before April 15, right? As opposed to, I've already paid them, everything's in, they owe me money, and I'm still worried, but what if something goes wrong? What if it doesn't get in time? What if I did them wrong? What if I get audited? What if I lose everything? What if now my wife leaves me because I didn't do my taxes right? If I have all of those worry thoughts, the issue is no longer the issue. The issue is the thinking pattern, and that's what we need to address. So if there's nothing actionable, what am I going to do about this? Right? I have kids that are 6 and 11. What if they don't go to college? What if one becomes a drug dealer? We're not there yet. I don't think my kid's a drug dealer yet. So where's my data? Like, what makes sense? Not I'm just scared or what if. And is there something I can do or should be doing about it now? Well, what I do with my kids is we're trying to teach them stuff that's morally and ethically applicable, right? We have a quiet time every morning. We pray with them. We talk about issues to help them kind of understand, like, what's a good, wise decision for both of my kids. Is there anything else I should be doing? Right? Should I get like a PI and have them follow my kids and make sure they're not drug dealers? Should I mean, like, what makes logical sense as opposed to I'm worried or I'm scared or what if? Okay? And that's kind of what we want to think about. Slide, please. All right. What do we know about from church is very often psychological issues are avoided. We don't want to talk about them. And there's a number of reasons for this. But very often we just kind of, oh, I'm fine, right? I had one patient talk to me and he said, like, he's with one of the guys from small group, and he said, like, and his friend said, hey, how are you doing? He goes, had a horrible week. And he went through did some discussion what he did, and he said the other guy just had this deer in headlights look of like, oh, he actually is talking to me about this, right? I just was saying something like, okay, how do I get out of this? And then, so he learned from that experience, like, I'm not supposed to share those things. Why? Because it's not acceptable to talk about, right? So part of it is sometimes at church we're like, hey, we're supposed to show the best side of us. When in reality, I don't think that's what church is about. Church is supposed to be ugly, messy, and dirty, right? We're supposed to be able to go to our friends, go to people and say, I am having a really bad week. I really messed up. I sinned so much this week, I don't know when it stopped, and I don't think it has. And I don't know how to control it, right? Those are the conversations we should be having, not I'm fine, right? But that's hard to do. And to be fair, that's, I think, not only in church, but I think that's part our own pride. Right? We don't want to admit those things to anybody. So that's not the church's fault per se, but church should be a place where we should be able to talk about these things regularly. The other thing is sometimes we talk about psychological issues differently than we do medical issues. So psychological issues are you should suck up, you should just deal with it. It's not really a problem, it's not a real thing. And you just make your way through. Right? That's what I did, so you should too, right? So we're talking about, like, hey, just read more, read the Bible more, pray more, as opposed to when we look at medical issues, oh, hey, we're going to pray, but what sort of, I know a good doctor, hey, you should talk to this guy, we can do these other things, like what medications are you on? Let's set up a food chain for you, right? So let's get everyone on this thing to help them out so they don't have to cook during this time. But we don't do that with mental health. So we see it as being separate. I think that also can be problematic of like, hey, why are we treating this separately? As opposed to, there's a lot of things that we should kind of rethink this a little bit. And while it is changing and being here like this is awesome, I would guess if this were like 15 years ago, this wouldn't happen. Maybe even 10 years ago, okay? So and I like that, we have these forums, and this is really important and crucial. But this isn't at every church. This isn't every place that this happens, nor is it accepted or wanted at all. There's other times I've been to other churches, I'll say, hey, this is what I do, I'll be happy to talk. They're like, I never hear from them again, okay? So, but the goal becomes, this is good. So normalizing distress, even talking about it can be good. Why? Because we want to let other people know, like, this is normal, because trust me, this is, you guys in here, and I'm not saying that everyone has an issue, but you guys aren't the only ones who are having some anxiety. It's not like, and everyone else at the church is fine. It's just you guys, right? So we know that people have this, but why aren't they here, or why aren't we talking about this more? It's because it's uncomfortable. There's lots of topics that we don't like talking about at church, and this is one of them. And I think, so I'm glad that you guys have this forum. You guys are blessed to have this. I'm blessed to be here. I think we're taking questions at the end, okay? Okay, so slide please. Social media, there's some good stuff about social media. Recently there's been things like, we should always stay away from it. But there's some good stuff about it. When we talk about the internet and social media, one big thing, like Colton was saying earlier, is like, I'm not the only one who has this. I'm not alone. Right? There's other people who have this. There's other people who are suffering with the same thing. Sometimes when we run groups, and there's like 12 people, like, you have the same thing? It's just eye-opening, like, there's 12 of us? I'm like, trust me, there's more than 12 of you guys, but yes, there's at least 12 of us who have this. Right? So it kind of normalizes that there's things. You can also find that there's help. You can also find out that there's good help that's based on research and data that's useful, and how to get some of that help. Negative stuff can be misinformation, right? The way I'll describe like essential oils, because there's no data that says essential oils have a lot of validity. There's some things that say it helps. Absolutely, there's good things about it. But if I'm having a panic attack and think I'm going to pass out or have a heart attack or die in that situation, it doesn't alleviate that, right? So there's absolutely things where there's essential oil shows it has some effect for some things which are useful, and we should keep that in mind. But it's not going to be, people will take information and extrapolate out to something that doesn't necessarily always work, okay? We can also look at, in regards to choosing the wrong type of professional, we talked about the clinical counseling thing, right? So we got to make sure we're seeking the right person for the right fit, right? So when we look at these different things do have different effects, and they're very useful for different issues. We got to make sure that we're lining it up appropriately, that we're choosing the right thing. Okay, slide please. Okay, so when we talk about Christian counseling, and again, I probably should have reworded this a little bit. Lay counseling, we talk about lay counseling, I'm going to friend, right? We do trainings for lay counseling, right? To how we call a lot of it supportive therapy, of how we help people understand, how we help people help them through different situations. Very often they'll say, hey, lay counseling, supportive therapy isn't designed to solve your problem. It's help you to kind of think it through and help you understand it better so you can make wiser decisions. Okay, what does the Bible say about these situations? What other situations have I been in that have been similar to this? How can I help you kind of have insight and understanding how your thinking pattern is affecting those outcomes, and then helping you think through those situations? Christian counseling is kind of a broad basket. So one thing I'm going to suggest to you is having a Christian as a counselor or a clinician is great, but it shouldn't be the only thing. Along with that is a concept. So some people will call me and say, hey, are you a Christian? And I'll say yes. And they'll say, oh, that's great. And I'm thinking in my head, but you don't know what kind of Christian I am, right? So, and then why is that important to you for treatment? So again, it could be very important, and it could be pivotal in what we're doing, and sometimes it doesn't matter at all. So it really kind of depends on the situation. Because all people, when we do our initial intakes, I'll ask them like, do you have come from a faith background? They say yes, and I'll say, what faith background? They say, I'm a Christian. Okay, how important is it? Oh, it's very important. Where do you attend church? Oh, I don't go to church. Oh, okay. How often do you read the Bible? I don't read the Bible. Well, then when you say you're Christian, what do you mean? Well, my parents are Christians. Well, at least they say they're Christians, so I'm a Christian. Okay, well, how then are you saved? Well, if I do enough good stuff, then I'll probably go to heaven, right? So when we look at Christian, we have to understand, what does that mean? So when you're asking for a Christian counselor or clinician, part of it is also, well, why are you looking for that, and how is that going to affect treatment? Because it can be pivotal, and it may not be important at all. So keep in mind when you're asking these questions, why you're asking them, the same way that if I say, I have anxiety, well, what does that mean? I want a Christian counselor. Well, why? And what do I want from that Christian counselor that would be different than someone who's not a Christian? Right? And what effects it will have? Because sometimes it can be outstanding. And I've seen some, like when I get to work with Christians and we can integrate some of that stuff, it's a lot of fun. It's really interesting. And you can see it has significant changes that I don't think would happen outside of a Christian context. And it can be outstanding, and I love doing that stuff. But again, you want to ask, like, what does that actually mean? Okay? All right, next slide, please. Okay, so for Christians, what does it mean for if I'm anxious as a Christian? That's probably normal. I'd be more concerned for you to say, I'm not anxious ever, right? That's more of an issue. That's a whole different type of disorder. Okay. If I have anxiety or any other disorder for that matter, it doesn't mean that I am less of a Christian somehow. More broken, more sinful, more problems that I have that's causing this issue necessarily than anyone else. And that's really important. And I want you guys to remember that. That it doesn't mean that somehow you're worse of a Christian or God loves you less or you love God less. It doesn't mean any of those things. You may feel that way. People may tell you that. That doesn't mean that it's true. So just keep in mind that just because I worry doesn't mean that I'm a good Christian, or doesn't mean that my faith somehow is weakened or less than others. If I have a psychological disorder, it's not my fault. Okay? A lot of these are actually genetic and biologically based. There are some things where you have modeling from parents and behavioral issues and so on, but a lot of it can actually, there's a lot of genetic components. So if you want, you can blame your parents, but you can't take all the blame because it's not all your fault. Okay? You can make things better or worse potentially by the way that you act and what you think and what you do, but you can't take blame for its impetus per se. Okay? Shouldn't feel ashamed or embarrassed of this any more than I should feel ashamed or embarrassed of having like weak eyesight or cancer or something else. And importantly, that God may not take away my anxiety. Colton was sharing a little bit about that, right? He may not take this away from me, but then there's a reason why it's around. I may not like it, I may not want it, and it still might be okay, all right? But can I do something to start addressing the issue? And that's something I want to talk about next. Slide, please. Ooh, I gotta hurry up. Okay, treatment. One of the things we talk about treatment is a three-component system. So I'm going to start moving a little bit faster. So we talk about the three-component system. Cognitions, how I think, prefrontal cortex, upper-level thinking, hypotheticals, what-ifs. Then we have how do I actually think about things? Is my thinking wise? Okay, so social anxiety, what will people think of me? Panic disorder, what if I have a heart attack? Generalized anxiety, what's next? What's the next shoe that's going to drop that's going to be horrible? As opposed to what does my data tell me? How many panic attacks have I had and how many times have I died, right? Where's my data, not I feel? Because I've had people who've had like literally tens of thousands of panic attacks and are convinced the next one's going to kill them, right? But where's my data? I'm 0 for 10,000. What's the likelihood that the next one's really gonna kill me? Not I'm scared or what if, okay? What will people think of me? Well, what do people think of me? Where's my data? Do people actually hate me all the time? Do I have any friends? Right, what happens when someone else makes a mistake in class? Does everyone laugh at them and the teacher like tosses them out of class and gives them an F? What actually happens rather than I'm scared or what if? Okay. Then based on my thinking pattern, I can have a physiological and emotional response or fight or flight or that low level of that. So if I have in my head that dogs are dangerous, what if it jumps on me? What if it bites me? What if it kills me? All the base part of my brain hears is danger. And it's going to respond with the emotion of fear, because it's protective, and a fight or flight response. My body's getting ready to protect itself, right? And then my behaviors typically is how do I get out? So we talk about the three-component system. Think, feel, do, and they all kind of interact. So I can't always control my automatic thinking processes immediately. I may have the automatic thought, the dog's gonna kill me. My body's gonna respond as if that's true, but I don't have to leave. I don't have to leave just because a dog's there. I'm gonna feel scared, I'm gonna have a panic attack, those thoughts are gonna run wild, and I'm still safe. I have to normalize my distress. And we do a lot of that in treatment, is normalizing distress and moving into it rather than away from it. So once we do that logical stuff, then we start to, hey, where's the data that we talked about before about the number of dogs? What happens, are dogs poisonous? What happens if I actually get bit, right? We walk through all of that stuff from data perspective, normalize it, even if it happens, which is highly unlikely, I'm gonna be okay. Then we actually start looking at pictures of dogs, to videos of dog attacks, to bringing a dog into session, to going to a dog park. Why? We want to normalize this and get used to that rather than get away from it, okay? Slide, please. So there's a couple different ways to do it. I primarily do CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, changing how we think and how we behave. Challenging thoughts. So we talk about a lot of what we call metacognition, thinking about my thinking. What does the data tell me, right? What am I thinking? Does my thinking make sense? Oh my gosh, the dog is going to kill me. Well, where's my data, not how do I feel? Can I normalize feeling off? Is that okay? What's really gonna happen if there's a dog? Well, it might jump on me. It might, even if it's big enough, might push me over, but is it really likely to kill me? Where's my data, okay? So we actually do a lot of that, and then we're looking at what we call irrational or non-logical thinking patterns. Catastrophizing, a big one. It's gonna be horrendous. Or it's really likely to happen, like planes crash all the time. No, they don't. Where's the data, right? So we're looking at those things and changing and recognizing my thinking patterns. Or because I really feel it, it's true, that's emotional reasoning. I really feel like she doesn't like me, so she must not like me, even though she's telling me she likes me and we don't have a problem. But no, I just feel that way, so therefore that's true, okay? That changes how we respond to things. We also work on changing behaviors. I learn to endure things and get used to it rather than move away from it, okay? So we have to get used to these things. And they're relatively short-term treatments. 18 sessions for generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorders, 12 sessions, or we'll do it in a week in an intensive format. So we're talking about relatively short. Not everyone does it this compressed, but it's possible to do it in relatively short. So we're not talking years and years and years. We're talking a couple of months, or we can do it in a couple of weeks, depending on what the issue is, okay? Dialectical behavioral therapy, acceptance commitment therapy, they're more focused on the cognitive aspects. Hey, I recognize that my thinking's off. They talk about like clouds, like what Colton's talking about, like letting the snowball go by. They talk about clouds going by as thoughts. I think about it more as a train track around your head, because that thought keeps on coming back. The dogs can kill me, the dogs can kill me, the dogs. But I don't have to grab that thought and put it in front of my head. I can just let it go by. So they focus more on that side of things. There's definitely types of medications focused primarily around serotonin to actually decrease your anxiety and increase your mood. So we do know that those things work for anxiety disorders. We also know there's certain things that don't work very well for anxiety disorders, okay? From the data, so we're always empirically based. What does the data tell me? What does the research tell me? Okay, we're big on research and data because we know that that makes sense. Which goes into, next slide please. The idea of when we talk about anxiety and in general, when we talk about these things, we shouldn't be afraid of science. Science is why you're using all those phones, right? Science is why we have cars that we drive. Okay, so the way that someone just much smarter than I am described it to me a long time ago was, if science and God don't fit together, there's either a misconception of how we understand God or we don't have our science right, okay? So either we don't our perception of God is wrong or our understanding of science is wrong, but they should really go together. So we shouldn't be fighting against the idea of science or using science. Someone else today, actually the pastor today at my church, when he was talking, he said, God can work through miracles. God can work through means, and means he meant by, he was talking about someone who had a surgery and then was healed of something, right? Both of them were blessed by God through those experiences. One through a miracle, that supernaturally God healed that individual, another person through a surgery. So just kind of keep that in mind. When we look at discussion of your faith, when we go to treatment and you're thinking about it, you do want to make sure that the person's okay with your faith and an understanding of faith and it's important to you. But you also have to make it clear to them, hey, this is important to me. So if God is central in your life and you revolve around your understanding of God and what God wants for you, is very different than people who, what did he say? I'm a CEO Christian, Christmas and Easter only, right? So his viewpoint and understanding of what, of God and how, that's going to be very different than someone who's much more active in the church, right? So when we have that, we have to have that understanding. So you also have to be clear on why it's important to you, an expression of, here's my faith and why it's important to me. And most people will minimally respect that, ideally understand or will research your faith and understand how that affects treatment, right? So those are things to think about, okay? But it should be on both sides of it. It should be not just like those pat responses of like just pray more, or the other side of it of like, well, we're not going to talk about your faith at all because it has nothing to do with this, because it clearly does. Okay, next slide, please. So, general concepts to keep in mind. Acute versus chronic. Is it something that's likely to go away soon? Is this just something like, oh man, like I'm just having a rough patch with my wife, but I know it's because we're stressed with our kids and the move and the change in jobs, and this will settle down in a week or two or a month or two, and we'll be okay. Then I may not need to do, if it's going to self-right in a sense, I may not need additional help. I might need some lay help. Guys, can you pray for me? Like, I'm just going through a rough patch. That's totally fine, and that makes a lot of sense. There's other times where if it's chronic, it's all the time, I might need more help than that. And then is it more of a counseling issue because of the situation? My wife and I are fighting all the time. We can't seem to resolve things. We're having a lot of communication errors. Marriage and family therapist is awesome for that. Is it, no, it's my marriage is fine, but I keep on worrying about my marriage. And I'm worried about money. And I'm worried about, oh, now we're talking about something that might be more of a clinical issue, right? And then we might be looking for a clinician at that point, okay? So you're trying to figure out again, like, hey, what services do I find in what situations? And that's what you want to kind of think about. Is it something that's likely to go away on its own if I just leave it be or get some help from some friends? Is it something where I need some more intensive help? And that be more from a counseling perspective. If it's situational is one way to think about it, or is it going to be more, no, it's a way that I approach all of my problems. That might be more of a clinical issue. Okay, and then you're looking for ideally in the research of like, hey, what does the research say works in these situations? What's going to be useful and have utility in this? Okay, and with that, then also from a Christian perspective, is this person going to be able to speak to me in an understanding of my faith enough that we can resolve this issue? Because that's what we want as well. Okay, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't be praying. This doesn't mean that you shouldn't be reading your Bible, because those things will be useful, right? God speaks to us through that as well. But just as we talk about medical sciences, like, hey, yeah, if we have cancer, absolutely we should be praying, but it's not just praying and like, let's not do anything else. Chemo might be good, radiation might be good, surgery might be good. Let's do the research to figure out which pathway we should be choosing and which doctor we're using to achieve that. Right, so we're using both skill sets. So you got to figure out what the issues are and then how we approach them. Okay, slide please. Okay, so if you want to reach me, we just moved offices, so that's my email. Don't call me right now because my phone will literally ring. That is actually my cell phone number. My wife says I have no boundaries, which is probably somewhat true. So don't call me right now. Okay, NAMI's a really good institution. 211 is you can just call them. They will give you general information and resources out there. If it's more of an OCD thing, International OCD Foundation is really good. There's some other things too locally that are really good that if you want, I can kind of, depending on the situation. CHOC is excellent for childhood issues. So there's some good organizations out there that can be of use too that have a lot of good websites or information. Okay, a slide please. So things to consider. So this is on your tables as well. And questions to kind of think about is, what are my automatic worry thoughts? So what do I automatically default to in terms of my thinking patterns? And what is my core concern about those? Not my surface, oh my gosh, I got to drive today. Well, what does that mean? Because that's a surface thought. What is the underlying core of fear? What if I crash? What if I die and there's no one there for my kids? What if, like whatever that is, okay? So what are those underlying core thoughts? And if it does occur, could I actually cope with a car crash? All right, well actually, a lot of us survive car crashes because our cars are pretty safe nowadays, okay? So what does the data tell us? Like, what do I actually understand? Is there anything I should be doing to actually address this issue, right? As opposed to I'm just worried. And recognizing, is it a worry thought issue or is there something I should actually be doing? Can I accept that worry is normal in certain situations? Okay. and that I'm okay with that as a Christian, that I worry sometimes, and that's okay. Are my current approaches to address the worry effective, or do I need to change my strategy? Does this actually address the issue, or does it just put a Band-Aid on it? Right? If I call my mom every time I have a panic attack, I might feel better in that moment, but if I've been having panic attacks for 6 years, it's not working. Right? I have to rethink a new strategy. Okay? If I have a conversation with God, is it a lot of what ifs or please or get me out of this? Or is it actually, hey, am I actually, can I rest in God in all of this rather than take this away from me, right? The idea of not asking for a easy road, but the endurance and ability to handle a difficult one, right? I don't think God doesn't say like, hey, this is going to be easy for you guys. He never says that, right? You look at most of the apostles, they didn't really have an easy life, right? That's not, I think, what God asks of us, but he gives us enough strength and enough ability if we ask him to handle things. And that's one of the things. But we can also get those from pastors, from friends, from counselors, from clinicians. So depending on what the issue is, and helps define what sort of help do I need and where do I go for that. Okay? I think that's all I have. I guess we can leave that up, or I'll let you kind of step into that.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. Lots of info, right? Fantastic. Well, we want to give you a little bit of time to turn in your tables. I would just say pick one of those questions to talk about around your table, so you can choose whichever one you want. The other thing, too, is your questions. Be sure to write those down. We'll be coming around during that to collect those cards, okay, for our Q&A session a little bit. So go ahead and turn in and talk about one of those questions together, and we'll come right back.
Anything I need or want, I know I can come to you in prayer. I know you will answer, Father, like no other. Some trust in horses and chariots, but not them, no. Cause my trust is in Jehovah, my Father and my Maker. Everything that I need, he gave me everything on a platter. Yeah, my trust is in Jehovah, my Father and Creator. You are all that I need, and you are everything in between. Oh, you are all that I require, omnipotent Father, Abba like no other, closer than a brother, always on my mind. Never sleep, you never slumber. When I call you, you answer. Oh, you are all that I require, omnipotent Father, Abba like no other, closer than a brother, always on my mind. Never sleep, you never slumber. When I call you, you answer. All that I require, always and forever, you're with me, with me. One time, let's go. Hey, I know that you're in control, you're too good to let me go, but I could use a break today. I should know, you see me in my struggle, not a thing that you don't know, but I need to be told. Oh, when life gets overwhelming, and I need you to help me.
fear is screaming out your name. So you say, God help me. You wonder if he's even listening. Truth is, I wonder the very same thing. So you don't have to feel ashamed. Let me walk with you through this valley and tell you all that I've learned to be true. Don't lose heart, don't you dare let go. I've been where you are, you are not alone. I know it gets dark, I know it gets hard, but we're gonna make it home. So don't lose heart. Take my hand, and I'll show you all the scars from where I've been. Remind you how we both know this story ends. And I know you'll do the same for me. These afflictions that are only temporary are gonna turn to glory beyond compare. So don't lose heart, don't you dare let go. I've been where you are, you are not alone. I know it gets dark, I know it gets hard, but we're gonna make it home. So don't lose heart. Don't lose hope, don't lose faith. Just hold on tight to every promise God has made. You can lose the fear in the light of grace. Just lift your eyes to your Father's face. Hear the song he's singing over you. He says, don't lose heart. I'm never gonna let you go. I'm right where you are. You're safe in my arms. So don't lose heart. Don't you dare let go. Been where you are. You're never gonna be alone. I know it gets dark. I know it gets hard. So we're gonna make it home. So don't lose heart. Oh, don't lose heart. Don't lose heart. We're
in your goodness, in your righteousness. I am in your presence, in your goodness, in your righteousness. For you are my righteousness. My hope is built on nothing less than you. My righteousness. My hope is built on nothing less than you.
Yeah, I do. There's nowhere to set it, so I'll just leave it there. Oh,
All right, everybody, let me pull you in. Love to hear all the chatter and talk, and so we're going to do our question and answer part right now. So here we go. Let me pray. That one always works good. Anyways. All right, there we go. Perfect. It's funny. We pray and then that works. I don't know why. Our ears are tuned to that here. So we got tons of questions. One of the questions that did come in that I'll just answer right away is, yes, we will make the slides available. Some of you guys wanted to know about the slides, so we'll make those available. We'll send something out when we send out our email on where to get those slides. So if you're not on our email list, fill out that thing in the middle of your table, and we'll make sure you get that, okay? All right, Kay, you want to start our...
sure. And I love the way that you did that bait and switch. We're going to pray, and then you didn't
You
pray.
like that? And then I didn't pray. But I'm going to pray at the end. I'm going to pray at the end.
That was really tricky. Okay. We figured you out, Pastor Todd.
It's not going to work next time, right?
Will
that's
not. No, you used up your one chance on that.
That was it.
Okay, so I was thinking about phobias. It's a very specific question, but I know that talking, both myself and other people, have wondered about just if I say I have a phobia, or if I mention it out loud, does that become fodder in my head for repetitive? Like if I don't say it, but it's just me, will that keep it smaller?
That's a good question. Hold on, is my mic? Okay, so probably not would be the answer. So when we look at phobias or other issues, it'd be kind of saying like, I don't have cancer, right? So it's still there. We can ignore it, but it's still going to be an issue. So again, we go back to how interfering or distressing is it? Is this something that I need to address? So I'm not in the best shape. So I can say I'm in shape, or I can say, but if practically that's not what's actually happening. So I might actually be doing myself a disservice by saying I'm in shape and then trying to run a marathon and clearly not finishing, right? Or actually injuring my body in that process. So the goal actually becomes, hey, what actually is going on? And how do I help address this issue, right? No, my marriage is fine. As opposed to like, no, we might actually need to address that.
Okay. All right, great.
That's good. One of the questions was, clinically, is CBT the most effective way to cope with anxiety, or are there any other approaches that work as well, like emotional focus therapy, things like that?
EFT is actually pretty good. There's a couple different types. It depends on the type of anxiety as well and how the person responds to it. Generally speaking, if you look at all modalities, CBT is as effective or more effective than others across all types, okay? However, there are differential things where, like if we're talking about a personality disorder, like borderline personality disorder, DBT is the way to go, right? So it kind of depends, but in general, when we look at
A lot of the ones that are useful, when you're looking, CBT is useful, but again, just like we were talking before, you have to vet whoever you're seeing. A lot of people say they do CBT, and they might take a weekend course or have had like one semester in it, but you're looking for people who do it on a regular basis. So when you ask people like, do you do CBT? Is it your primary modality? Another thing you want to ask is there homework? Because CBT is always marked by homework. So you're doing things like trying to learn a new language. If I go to someone, like if I go to you to learn French once a week for 45 minutes, I do nothing else for the rest of the week, how long am I take to learn French, right? So it's the same thing. So I'm trying to change the way that I think and behave. Doing it once a week for 45 minutes isn't going to net me anything, okay? So it has to be a consistent practice at home. So that's what you're looking for as well, is there actually changes? So we have workbooks, we have worksheets, we do physical practices, we do all sorts of things to reinforce what we practice in session.
So I wanted to ask you something about OCD. When we were chatting after you finished speaking, you mentioned just something off the cuff, and it really caught my attention. You said that you mentioned how long it takes for OCD to be diagnosed, and it shocked me.
Yeah, so we about 30-40% of our patient load is OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. So we're pretty involved with the OCD community. On average, it's 7 years to correct diagnosis from onset and 7 years to finding the right type of treatment. So it is actually hard to find. It's a lot of people hide it. A lot of people are embarrassed by it, especially when we talk about specific types of obsessions. Some of them are more obvious, like when we're tapping or like redoing things over and over again. But if I have a thought that is very embarrassing to myself and I don't want to share with other people, so some of them are like incest or bestiality. It's like, oh, we don't want to talk about these things, or they're really embarrassing. Or we have scrupulosity. We talk about religiosity. Like I have thoughts of like God doesn't love me, or if I don't do this, I've committed blasphemy to the Holy Spirit. And they don't want to bring that up. Or they'll go to their pastors and they'll talk about it from a theological perspective, not recognizing it's an OCD thing. OCD goes away by itself about 1% of the time, so it tends to stick around. But once we figure out what it is, there's some really good treatments for it that are relatively brief. We're talking about like 40 sessions on average. Okay, so these are things that we can treat and that we can change with the goal of less than 1 hour per day of obsessions and compulsions, although some people it goes away completely.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, someone asked if we had an OCD support group. We don't at this point, but that's something that we can explore. We do have our family, we do have our Living Grace support groups where we have people with different diagnoses in for just general support, but we don't have that at this point. So I just want to answer that question on the back
There
of
is
that.
an OCD support group that's run monthly through SoCal OCD, and I think it's held on the Mariners campus once a month. So if you look up, I think it's just SoCal OCD. It's run by Chris Tronsden, Trondsden, I think, and they do that once a month. It is not Christian-based, but if you're looking for other people who are dealing with it, also IOCDF.org, International OCD Foundation, they have a great organization. They have a great website with lots of good resources on there. In fact, when is it? I think April, there's a speaker series that will be in Costa Mesa. They're doing it also LA. So if you go to the website, you'll see some additional information on that. But it's a really good resource if you're looking for additional help for OCD.
Okay, so the slightly different perspective, we've been talking about, if you're the person who is living with, anxiety in some form, what if you have a loved one or a friend and they are having a panic attack? What can we do in those moments?
Yeah, when a panic attack's actually happening, it's too late, right? I'm in a fight or flight mode, right? So if I think that I'm about to die, you just want, in that moment, you're actually just trying to get them to either a safe space where they feel kind of safe and can calm down by themselves, or just try to create a distraction for them for some people. So those are short-term solutions, but they're not going to be long-term ones, right? It'll just kind of get them by in that moment. They might act out, they might yell at you, so don't take it personally. But just, you can try to give them something, basically some sort of distraction. They might want their medication at that time, which again might in that moment decrease their anxiety for a little bit. But again, these are shorter term solutions. It's not something that's going to be a long-term effect. But again, if you're the support in that moment, that's about all you can do. You can also start suggesting to them, hey, there's ways to get additional help that will help for a longer term solution rather than a shorter one.
Yeah, in the moment. So in the moment, it's not good to talk logic to the right brain, right? The base of the brain there? Yeah.
It's like trying to talk to, when your kid's tantruming, right?
Right.
Like kids tantruming, there's nothing you can really do. You just got to let the tantrum run, right? You set it up so that they're safe. You don't give in to the tantrum, and then you deal with it afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. So don't get mad if they're not listening to you when they're in a panic attack, okay? It's not you, it's the body, and I think that's important.
The only other thing I would suggest is if you know your friend or loved one is prone to panic, you might want to let them know, hey, we're going a place, and if this is uncomfortable for you, be it a trauma issue or a panic issue or just a social anxiety issue, are you okay with this? Or at least prep them ahead of time. This is where we're heading. This is where we're going. We're going into traffic, and there's going to be a lot of stop and go. Are you going to be okay with that? Right, so you let them know ahead of time, and then they say, I'm bowing out, or like, yeah, let me get some more stuff, or like, I'm totally good. So it gives them the option of like how to address that from their own perspective too. So front loading is very useful as from a friend or family perspective.
That's great. One of the questions we had is, what is the first step in normalizing a situation?
That's a good question. Normalizing it becomes, do I recognize that this is okay? Number one, I know this is okay. From a logical perspective, not an emotional one, I know logically I'm safe, nothing horrible is going to come out from this, so I'm okay. Then once I do that, looking at the data and information, then I have to start normalizing my body and my body response of having panic attacks to having, to wanting the urge and the emotion of like fear and wanting to run, saying all of this is normal, but just because I feel this way doesn't mean there's a problem. So I have to start shifting my thinking pattern. There's different ways to do it. Sometimes we start with younger kids. We start with just being in the room and normalizing that scary thing. To other adults, we tend to do more of the logical side, where say, hey, let's start prepping you ahead of time. Right? So it kind of depends. But the idea is I have to get used to that 3-component system, that think, feel, do. We're looking at all 3 parts of that. Can I normalize my scary thinking, get used to strong physiological, emotional responses while changing my behaviors?
You talked about, along with that, you talked about somewhere in there, in the normalizing, I took so many notes, I'm trying to find it here on my paper. You talked about like scary is different than danger, which I thought was really helpful distinction. I was going to ask you about that, but I remember when I was in my 20s, I really did have hypochondria, just terrified that I was, every headache was I was going to die. Everything at the end was I'm going to die. You know, whatever it was, the end result is I'm going to die. And I'll never forget a piece of just a sentence that was told to me by a doctor that I have not forgotten and that has helped me in so many fearful and anxious situations, is this, and it's the very logical, is that possible? And it was like, yes. Is it probable? No. And just the thousands of times I have asked myself that question, is it possible? I don't like to fly. I really don't. I do business with God every time I fly. And if you ever hear a rumor of Kay Warren held hands with a strange man on a flight, it's probably because I was scared. So it was probably true. But what I say to myself, truly, every time, is it possible that I could die in a plane crash today?
Right.
Yes. Is it probable? No.
That's great advice. We do talk about possible versus probable all the time. And the other way to think about it is it so probable I need to change my behavior? Is it so probable the plane's going to crash that I get off? Where's my data, not how do I feel? Why, we have roughly 40,000 flights per day in the United States, right? I think our last major crash, I think was like 2015. So it's just like roughly 2 million flights. What's the likelihood this is the flight that is going to go down, right? And again, we're looking for the data. So when we look at data, both positive and negative, so if I'm getting on the plane and like an engine's falling off and like the pilot's
we
drunk,
don't need you to describe that. Thank you.
So we're looking at that. If people are crying as they're getting on the plane, right, and signing wills, I'm not getting on, and that's reasonable, right? So when we look at, like, for example, Russian helicopters are notoriously not safe, right? They have a pretty poor reliability rate. I'm not getting on one. I'm okay with that. Why? The data would support that. Same thing with North Korean airlines. There's a lot of information that says it's not safe. I'm not getting on, right? So we're looking at, but if I'm getting on a major carrier in the United States, it's probably going to be okay. What does the data tell me? Do I need to change my behavior based on what, as opposed to I feel? So I may feel better if I get off the plane. Oh man, that was so scary. But the better question is, did the plane land on the other side okay? Then why did I get off? Because I felt better, but then I missed my flight. Was it worth it? That's the other question, right? So what's the cost? So we're doing cost analysis, right? Number one. We're also doing, so cost-benefit analysis, we're also looking at data for how likely is this, and should I change my behavior based on that?
Yeah, that's really good. Like we've talked about here and said before, right? Our emotions are designed to be soothed, not to solve issues. And so if we're trying to make decisions with our emotions, we're going to go in some bad spaces with that. So
Yeah, the way I'll describe it is if I base my decisions on my emotions, like I'll be divorced and remarried with my wife multiple times within a day, right? Because why? Because I go through, my emotions go all over the place. But what does my data show about our marriage? Like, is this wise rather than how do I feel in that moment?
yeah, that's awesome. That's great. You mentioned, we talked a little bit about, MFT, marriage family therapist. We talked about church counseling and things like that. Is there a place where the clinical and the church counseling goes together, or even the, like a therapist?
Yeah, and this is, again, generalities, because there are some marriage and family therapists that do awesome clinical work. I know some clinical people that do awesome counseling work, but remember, these degrees are not designed primarily for that, right? So, like, I literally had no counseling in all of my training. So, I don't have any counseling background, where other ones will do that. We had someone who, she was actually has a Ph.D. in counseling, but she took all the clinical coursework. So she's an excellent clinician as well as a really good counselor. So there's absolutely room. So we're looking for, hey, like, this is why we ask questions before you start. Like, what is your background? Like, what's your training? What have you done? How many people or percentage of your patient load does what I'm experiencing? So it gives you that good sense of what's going on. And again, it goes to also what the issues are and what situations. And ultimately, are my issues solved? Do we actually address these issues? So if I'm going back like year 2, year 3, year 4, I would suggest you were not having good efficacy, right? If I'm going year 4 of trying to learn French or trying to lose weight, I'm going to wonder either as a patient I'm doing something wrong or there's something wrong with my clinician, right? So a lot of times we'll step out about like 4 or 5 sessions. I'm like, hey, how do you guys think this is going? And very often I hear like, I think it's going kind of slowly, or I don't like this aspect of it, but then we'll explain why. Well, this is where we are in treatment and this is why this is happening. So you should feel comfortable. You should be able to advocate for yourself of like, I'm concerned that I don't know if this is doing what it's supposed to be doing. They should be able to say, so this is why we start with an assessment, so we know what the diagnoses are. And then we say, okay, based on these diagnoses, these are the protocols that we're using, that we're mixing together, and this is the number of sessions we think likely we're gonna hit. Okay, if we go, so we're talking like if it's gonna be 20 sessions, I don't think it's gonna be 10, I don't think it's gonna be 40, okay? Unless something comes up. So we have a ballpark, and then you should be able to hit, like, we're now on session 6, we're about halfway through, what do you guys think about what we're doing? So it should be able to give you those things, rather than, we'll just see where this goes, right? You don't want that, like, mechanic goes like, we'll just see, I don't know, we'll see what happens, right? No, we want to know.
That's what we were going to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, yeah, I mean, in good process with that, it usually can work hand in hand. In other words, if you seem like you're doing the same thing over and over again, there's some anxiety going on, it's good to talk to your therapist about it, so the clinical work can be done, and many times in conjunction with what's happening for you relationally and some of the other things that are going on in your life as well. So those usually go good in tandem, right? Things like even medication, right? Those kinds of things. Very, very important that that's the case, because sometimes we could use therapy as our coping strategy, right? Not for growth, right? Because it makes us feel better when we talk about things, but if we don't have goals in where we're trying to get to, then we just keep doing the same thing over and over again, right? And so there's a good balance between that. And like he's saying, it's good to advocate and ask, hey, I still have this anxiety. Do you think it's a good idea that maybe I explore medication or I explore a clinical approach? You know, it's all, it usually goes hand in hand.
Let's talk just briefly about marijuana, because that question comes up in relation to anxiety and self-medication and
So marijuana, microdosing, ketamine, these are new things that are coming up that we're hearing more and more about. In general, there's a couple things. So THC does decrease on the short-term my anxiety level. I don't know of any professionals in my field that are like, this is awesome, right? Most people say, oh, we're not real great about this. It does have some effects. It can be useful given certain situations. Right, so if I'm very anxious in giving a speech, taking a Xanax, THC, something like that might be of some use if it's a one-off, if I'm not doing it very often. But it doesn't solve the problem. So the same thing when we even talk about SSRIs and SNRIs, like the typical medications, like we think about like Prozac, right, is an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It's useful, but it has limits. It's not going to solve the problem. Okay, so the best way we'll describe is it turns down the volume of that intrusive thinking, that scary worry thinking. It turns down the volume, but it doesn't get rid of it. So it can be useful to turn on the volume so I can take care of my family, so I can go to work, so I can see my therapist to help me with these problems. But eventually, the problem is once we come off the medication, all my anxiety comes back, right? Or I up the dosage or then change the medication and at some point it loses some of its efficacy long term. So the goal becomes I can use a medication to push it down enough that life is bearable, and I can now seek treatment and learn tools to deal with it, and ideally then come off the medication. Some people say a medication for their whole life. There are some people like, hey, I just have this low dosage of fluvoxamine and I'm fine, and I've been doing this for 20 years. That's fine, right? As long as I'm okay with the side effects. But for most people, it's, hey, it helps, it takes the edge off, but it doesn't get rid of my underlying worries. That's why we do use it to bring it down enough that we can seek other help. But like microdosing, there's some research that says like ketamine microdosing is useful. The problem is, especially for people who've have a previous issue with like drugs and alcohol, anyone who takes ketamine is going to feel good, right? It's going to make you feel good. And they're going to want more of that. And sometimes people seek that out more than actually using it as medication and treatment. Treatment protocols are like typically in a hospital setting, highly kind of like everyone's watching and making sure it's done properly. I'll know people like, hey, so if I take ketamine in my garage, like this is going to work, right? I'm like, not sure that's what microdosing is about. So it should be very highly regulated and watched. It's not something that's kind of done casually.
Another question someone had is, what do I do to help people understand me if I've got anxiety, right? So that I can rely on them for support when they're. So how do I explain this to them?
That's also a really good question of understanding of like how does it make me feel? How do I normalize it? So it depends also how open they are. So some people like just deal with it. Like I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to deal. So some people you just have to recognize they're never really going to get it. They're not going to be able to help. Some people like you have to explain it to them of this is what I mean when I feel scared and this is why. So sometimes helping them understand. Sometimes we'll actually do an exercise which we do with our patients anyways. Remember talking about normalizing physiological response and getting used to feeling physically off. We'll practice that actually in session, and then sometimes, especially with the kids, we'll bring the parents in and show it to them to normalize this is what your kid feels like. So actually, why don't we do it right now? So if everyone can stand up. Okay, if you have some sort of like health issue, don't do this. Don't feel scared, it's okay. So what I'm gonna have you do is I'm gonna have you breathe in and out very deeply, but quickly as if you're blowing up a balloon. So it's gonna be like this. Okay, hold on a sec. You're gonna go as long as you can or until I say stop. I want you to think about the physical sensations you're experiencing. I want you to think about the thoughts that you're having while we're doing this, okay? Ready? In 3, 2, 1, go. Keep on going, nice and deep. Doing a good job, keep on going. Focus on the physical sensations you're experiencing. Also noticing the thoughts you're having about doing it. Keep on going, keep on going. Good, and stop. Physical sensations, what do you notice? You can sit down. Dizzy, what else? Out of breath. Dry mouth. Heart racing. Anyone feel lightheaded? Tingly, right? Those are the same sensations people get when they have a panic attack. So if you want, then there are thoughts. When is this going to stop? I don't like this. Some people are like, this is totally fine, or this is kind of fun. But they're not anxious about that, right? So it depends on the person, but a lot of those thoughts are, I don't like this. What if something bad happens? What if I pass out, right? So if you do that with people and they start to recognize, oh, this is how you feel like when you're trapped in a car. Oh, I get it. So sometimes explaining it to them either physically like that or actually telling them like how I feel emotionally and physically can be useful. So, but this is what we do with our patients. We actually have them, You did it for about 35 seconds. We usually go for a minute. And one of multiple physiological things we'll do with people, and we'll go home and have them practice 3 times a day, 1 minute every time. And to normalize, I feel off. So when we talk about that, what we call exposure and response prevention, or ERP, I want to normalize feeling off to the point that I'm not scared of this anymore. I probably do this in my office like 2-3 times a week, right, with different patients. So I do it often enough that I don't care. Yes, my throat's dry. Yes, I feel lightheaded, and so what? Rather than because of this, something horrible is going to happen. So when you explain to other people, number one, you start to, this is what I feel when I feel panicky, and that's an easy one to do. We also like spin people around in chairs and do other stuff, but this is the easiest one to do. And then we actually, so if you want to show other people, so sometimes the parents are like, oh man, like you're dealing with this every day? I mean, they start to recognize, like, my son has this every day. How much courage do you have to do this every day? And then we start normalizing it.
Sounds like it also increases empathy
It does, it really does.
and compassion. Yeah, I like that. I mean, I didn't like that, but I like that approach of how it helps loved ones build empathy. Yeah.
It also, for the individual, starts building data of, I don't pass out, I don't have a heart attack, nothing bad happens other than I feel uncomfortable. And when I start thinking about my panic and my worry as if it were a headache, rather than impending doom, it's just a headache. It's just a panic attack. My body starts responding differently to that. And I start to get used to it to the point my anxiety starts to drop off, and it's not as big of a problem.
I'll just end with this question just to answer that, because I thought this is a good one. How do you deal with times when you question God for having anxiety or a mental health issue? And let me just tell you that that's normal. Okay? Whether it's a mental health issue, whether it's anxiety, whether it's physical suffering, right? Whether it's, all of these issues and problems we have in our lives, that's normal. That's what, read the Psalms, David all the time, right? Read Habakkuk. How long, God, are you going to keep doing this? At the end of the day, right, what we understand is that we connect with Jesus. He said we're going to have suffering this side of heaven, right? And so one way to look at that, one way I look at it with my own struggles, is the fact that he's with me in all of those things. And I can bear those things because of what he's done. And you know what? You're not alone in that. Jesus went through it, and I want you to look around in this room, right? We're all here because we care about this, and because this is how life is this side of heaven. But what happens is, we know one day every single one of us will be healed completely, right? Right? Completely. Some of us might be healed a little bit this side of heaven, but all of us, the other side, will be healed completely. And we will all celebrate together for what we've gone through together. All right? Because our faith gets deepened in the middle of this. Somehow God uses that. I don't know how. I'd love to say, hey, can we do it an easier way? Right? But I'm too stubborn, and I don't, always think that and all those kinds of things. But when I set my mind in that place, right, he's there with us, and you're not alone either. Okay? So it's normal to question. It's normal to lament, right? There's a whole book called what? Lamentations, right? Where Jeremiah just laments, right, about everything. That's because it's normal. God expects it, right? So you can bring it to him, and he's big enough, okay? And we're here for you as well. So, important question. All right, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here with us. Fantastic. A few things that I want to bring up just here. We have our support groups. You can see there on the board. We have Family Grace for those who are family members who have a loved one who's wrestling with a mental health issue, and we have Living Grace for those who are living with a mental health issue. Those are our support groups. We have them both online and on campus. Okay, so you have a Zoom version or an online version. So those of you that go, I don't want to be in front of people, or I can't, we have options. A couple other things is, again, we have our ways to get involved in our mental health community. Counselor training, for those of you that wanted to do the counselor training, that is starting up here pretty soon. If you go, you can sign up online. If you're interested in that, just on the form next to it, just say counselor training, and we'll get you info for that. Now, understand, you don't have to become a counselor when you go through the training, okay? You can go through the training and get all the goodness of that, and then see if you're called to it, okay? So it's not like you have to say, I'm committed, and I'm going to. No, come and find out about it. We have some really great training. I say that, and then I realize I'm on some of the videos. So I'm not pumping myself up. I'm just saying that the training is really good from the standpoint of helping you understand, right, how our faith integrates with a lot of these things that we're talking about, okay, and how you can help other people as well. And what you'll find is you end up working on yourself in the middle of it, which is the best part, okay, because we all grow. And then we have, again, our support groups, Celebrate Recovery. If you want more information, they're in the back, like I said. Prayer, if you want prayer, our prayer team will be here in the very back corner over there to pray with you. And then we have a Breathe Call coming up on March 20th. And again, that's for family members, right, who have a loved one with a mental health issue. And then we have our Breathe Retreat up there as well on April 19th, okay? And all of that information is right here. You can see registration is open, and we would love to have you involved in that. And I think if you go to kwarren.com /Breathe Retreats, okay, you can get more information on signing up there.